Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode to a guide to B2B podcasting. In this episode, I'm really excited to dive in with you guys, and today we're going to be talking about your enterprise podcast process. So what I find when talking with a lot of companies and bigger enterprises is that a lot of times people that are tasked with podcasting don't really have experience. They've never really produced a podcast before, and so they're really kind of concerned and worried about what it looks like, how to create a podcast, all of those kind of things. And I've done other episodes in the past on really the process of starting a podcast, how to launch one, how we even launch one at Content Allies. But really what I want to share is, getting through the launch, there's a lot of one-time things there, but the real core thing of a B2B enterprise podcast is the recurring kind of process that you're going to go through each episode with. And so in this episode, I'm going to be walking you through what a episode looks like beginning to end for basically an enterprise podcast process. And if you would like to see a copy of this process, if you just send me an email at jake@contentallies.com, I've got a really great just template, a checklist that basically we use internally and we use with all of our enterprise customers to basically walk through each of their episode productions with them. So if you want to see a checklist version of this, just email me at jake@contentallies.com. All right, so let's dive in and talk through this. So basically, let's assume that you're getting started with your podcast, you're trying to plan your first episodes, or maybe you're 10 episodes in and you're just starting a new episode. But this is the process you're going to take to pretty much every episode that you work with. And depending on your organization, there might be a few slight customizations that you make with this. But in all, this is a pretty strong enterprise podcast process for you to kind of start your foundation from. First thing you're going to do is decide. You need to decide on speakers and or a topic for an episode or both. So most often an episode for an enterprise will kind of spur from, hey, we have this great speaker who is open to speaking on our show. And that can be one thing that starts it. Or you can say, hey, here's this topic that we want to cover. Okay, now who are we going to pull in as a speaker for this? So you can kind of come from either angle on that. But that's kind of your first thing, is just decide what is the topic and who is speaking. That is step one of your enterprise podcast process. Next thing you want to do is you're going to schedule. You're going to schedule and coordinate typically a 15 to 30 minute kickoff call with the speakers for this. Now, when I've worked with smaller companies, they'll often kind of skip over the kickoff calls, or you may have to skip this if you're getting, say, a really high-profile external guest. But in most cases, and with most guests, especially if you're going to have a large amount of distribution behind this podcast, you want to hold a kickoff call with the guest and the host and anybody who's going to be on that podcast. Now, once you have the kickoff call scheduled, what you actually want to do is prepare a brief and what we'll call a podcast brief. I also have a template on this that I'm happy to share with you as well. But again, you want to kind of prepare basically like an agenda of how you would expect the podcast to run. What are some key questions? What are some talking points there? And so that's kind of one of the first things you want to do, so that whenever you actually have that kickoff call, you're not just going from scratch. You're not asking them to brainstorm. You say, hey, here are some ideas. This is what we're thinking for the episode. What are your thoughts? Is there anything you would like to talk about? Is there anything you don't want to talk about? And so you want to kind of prepare a podcast brief, which again, we've got a template on this. If you just send me an email, that I'll send with you as well. And really preparing that call for that kickoff call is the next real key point there. So at this point, you decided on speakers and a topic, you've scheduled your kickoff call, and now you've prepared a brief that you can share with this person prior to the actual call. The next step is to actually hold that kickoff call. This is typically a really kind of short call. It's just showing up, it's walking them through the brief, saying this is what we're looking for, this is what we're thinking, what topics do you have, what else do you want us to hit? Is there anything we can't ask you on this interview? And you're really just trying to align and get a rough bullet point outline of the interview in place so you guys have something to follow during the actual interview. Again, these kickoff calls don't need to be super lengthy there, but that is kind of the core piece of it. Another piece of information you want to gather on that kickoff call is, do they need a microphone? And a lot of times enterprises are going to ship out microphones to their speakers and even their guests. And so basically, you'll find out that if they need a microphone, and if so, what is the address to ship that to? Then after that kickoff call, what you're going to do is you're going to ship out that microphone. That is your next step there. You're going to ship a microphone to the speakers Again, we use Amazon on this. There are a few recommendations I can kind of share as well that we actually put into our podcast process here, but really some simple ones there. I recommend going with something really simple that plugs into the headphone jack on the computer. If you give people USB headphones or USB microphones, it can create a lot of complications. So go with something simple. But again, if they have earbuds, AirPods, or you don't want to budget for this, onboard audio works great as long as they're not in a really noisy environment. You can still get by with that. And as long as your internal team members or your internal speakers always have great audio, that's really what I would say is the most important. But a lot of cases, our clients are going to be shipping out podcast microphones to all of the speakers. The next step is to refine. You're going to then take that kickoff call. You're going to take all of your notes from that kickoff call, and you're going to refine that into a script or bullet point outline. Some companies really like to get very scripted with this and make sure that they've got the exact key talking points. Others will simply have a bullet point outline, and they let people improv a bit more during the actual recording. So either way, you just want to make sure that after that kickoff call, you dedicate some time to refine that podcast brief into something that is very useful during the actual recording. Next step is approval. This is a really good stage. And again, this could be different for different companies, but a lot of companies will get approval on that script or that bullet point outline before recording. A lot of marketing communications companies, they don't really have time to listen to full-length podcasts to gain approval on those. And so what is typically better and what they will often prefer is to approve a script or the key talking points before the recording. And so this is a common point where if you need to get approval from marketing communications, getting that on your podcast brief, your outline, and your script ahead of time, that is most of the time going to be the quicker, easier route for approvals. The next step, which I'll say some companies do this, some don't, but the next step is a dry run. Some clients really love to do a dry run recording of their podcast episode. And so basically you're looking at, typically a 45 or 60-minute block where people will show up and you guys kind of do a mock interview. Again, if you have a very high-profile guest, this is probably not going to be an option, but this is often something I would say people do whenever they're internal. You're pulling in internal guests within your company, and you really want to make sure something's really polished or people are kind of uncomfortable with it. Some companies do these. I am not a huge fan of the dry run. I think the actual just real recording, I think it's more raw and authentic whenever you don't do a dry run, but some companies prefer to do this just to make sure that the performance and everything can be improved. But I am personally not a fan of the dry run, but it is an option there if you would like it. Then the next step is to actually record the episode. So very simply, you're going to record that podcast episode. Typically, you want to block out 45 to 60 minutes of a time block on the guest calendar. You're going to make sure that they have that podcast brief before the interview and basically show up and you're going to walk through that interview and just record the episode. Really straightforward, nothing crazy. You've done all the hard work in your kickoff call and you're planning on the front end. Now, the next step, another optional one here, is a voiceover. If required, a lot of podcasts will have a custom intro or outro, especially at the enterprise level, where you may have different speakers or different guests on every episode. So you can do a kind of custom voiceover at the beginning and the end. And if you pull on a podcast production partner like Content Allies, they're going to handle all the voiceover, everything like that for you. So no worries there, but it is something where, again, typically you'll write the voiceover script and actually get the voiceover cut right after the interview is recorded. Next step is production, and that's where basically you're going to have your podcast production partner actually begin producing the episode. And so again, there's a ton of steps here I'm not going to get into. I'm just going to leave this as production because I would say that for most enterprises, trying to produce this in-house will be a nightmare. Because if I were to really break down all the production steps, you're looking at the audio production, the video production, you're looking at writing of articles, you're looking at creation of social posts, you're looking at designing of graphics. So you've got about 5 to 6 people that are involved in every single one of these just to produce each individual episode. So there's a ton of steps there, but the nice part is if you work with a podcast production partner like Content Allies, basically we handle all of that. And pretty much you record the episode, and then a couple weeks later, you're going to basically get all of your resources, all your video, your audio, your social posts, your design, graphics, your articles. All of that is going to be done and ready for you. The next step is review. You're going to then review all the content assets, go through any tweaks, changes, approvals, feedback, anything like that. Again, this is a point where some companies may have their Marcom approval step land here. as opposed to the scripting. All kind of depends on your company's internal approval process, but that's something you'll want to communicate with your Marcom department on to figure out what the approval process looks like. And then next, we're going to go into publish. And so then you're going to publish the episode really to two primary places. First, you want to get this onto your podcast hosting platform. This could be Libsyn, Simplecast, Acast, any of these podcast hosting tools. You're going to publish it there, and by publishing the podcast on your hosting platform, that's going to syndicate it out to iTunes, to Google Podcasts, to Spotify, to Stitcher, all of those podcast directories. And then you also want to make sure you're going to publish that and embed the podcast and the article and everything on your website. So those are the two places that every episode is going to then be published live. Now, the next stage, we're going to get into promotion. And this is where, again, there can be a lot of kind of custom things in the promotion side of stuff, but I'll give you some of the kind of core promotion tactics that we're often running with each of our clients. First of all, very simple and straightforward. You're going to schedule out all the social posts. So again, if you're working with Content Allies, we're going to create a ton of social content for you to promote each episode. And so you want to make sure to get that out into your social media queue. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to promote your episode through a tool called QPromote. QPromote is the best kept secret in the internet. Super cool. Great way to get a ton of eyeballs on your content. Basically, they have a partnership with Buffer. And if you've never used Buffer, it's a social media tool similar to Hootsuite or any of these social media scheduling tools. And basically what you're doing is inside of these tools, they have recommended content to share that is based on the algorithm and other things that that person is sharing. And they're just going to populate some content there saying, hey, we recommend that this is great trending content to share. And with QPromote, we're basically paying to put your content in that recommended content to share. And it's really cool. We use this for a ton of our clients, and you'll get thousands of clicks, thousands of impressions from this. And we've got an agency subscription at our company, but I would highly recommend checking it out even for your own business as well. The next step of promotion would be paid promotion of podcast episodes. Now, again, not every company is going to put paid budget behind their podcast, but we found a lot of companies, if you can get a partner in the paid media company or paid media department of your company, there's definitely a lot of leverage you can get by just putting a small amount of boost behind your episodes to make sure to get it out there in front of the right people. Another promotion channel would be coordinating with your PR department or any media publications about the release. I think this is really one of the biggest opportunities that bigger companies have with their podcasts is really leveraging their PR department, because PR is always looking for really good hooks, really good angles, really interesting ways to kind of get more press out there. And with podcasts, you're really giving them some great content and a great hook to help them go out and do their jobs better and get placement. I'll give you some examples, but we had a client doing a podcast on women in engineering, and doing another one around diversity within their organization and things like this. And these are great pieces where basically they're putting together these amazing content pieces, and then you're basically giving ammunition to the PR department so they can do their job better. So if you can build an alliance with your PR department, that can be a really great way to make your podcast go a lot further. And then one of the other final kind of tactics that I'll talk about here is just you want to make sure to share all of your episodes and your social media content and all the graphics you created with your guests and speakers. Especially if you're pulling on really high profile guests, if you're able to reach out to them and say, hey, here's a bunch of graphics, here's some videos we cut up from your episode, can you share these out in your social media? Then you're basically giving your guests and your speakers a ton of content and ammunition to basically go and promote this show on your behalf to their audience. So again, if you get really high profile guests in, this can be another really incredible way to leverage and get that out there to your ideal customers. So that's the process from beginning to end. Again, I'll walk through this really quick. So first, decide on speakers and topic. Schedule a kickoff call. Prepare for the kickoff call and prepare a podcast brief. Hold the kickoff call and refine those talking points. Ship out microphones to your speakers. Refine that kickoff call podcast brief into a script or bullet point outline. Gain approval from marketing communications. Hold a dry run as an optional thing. Record the actual episode. Cut any voiceover for the intro and outro. Send the episode into the production queue with your production partner. Review all of the content assets for approval. Then publish the episode to your website and podcast hosting platform. Schedule out all the social media posts. Promote the episode through QPromote. Start paid promotion of podcast episodes. Coordinate with your PR department and media publications about the release. And then finally, share all of your episodes and social content with guests and speakers. So that is the enterprise podcast process from beginning to end. I hope you found this valuable and useful. It is something there where, again, it's what we found is with big enterprises, a lot of people in the mix, a lot of people trying to touch the podcast. If without a process, it gets really muddy really quickly. And what you need is a process and a system that this is how we walk through it. These are the steps, and this is kind of your guiding light. And so whenever we work with enterprises as content allies, we put this process in place. We drive this within your organization, and we really want podcasting to be a system that is not a lot of work. It's refined, it's clear, it's not ambiguous, and that's what we really do at Content Allies. So if you'd like to see a copy of the template and the podcast briefs and everything I mentioned today, reach out to me at jake@contentallies.com. And if you need help producing your podcast, feel free to send me an email as well. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you reaching out, and I'll see you on the next episode.